We've been working really hard on rhetorical analysis. And really, we've been doing a good job trying to read like writers or like speakers or letter writers or whatever it may be by really paying attention to what are the interesting moves that are being made based on kind of like what's motivating that speaker or that writer. And so we haven't really focused on what the introduction or conclusion would look like for this. We've really focused on just making sure we're doing a nice job with our reading. I want to take a brief second just to reinforce why that's important. At the end of the day, the reason that the College Board loves this assessment is, yes, it is a writing exam, but it's also a reading exam. It does both. And I think oftentimes the struggle students have is we get so caught up in worrying about the writing and having to do it quickly that we forget that at the end of the day, this is a test to see, are we good, careful readers? Can we understand the rhetorical situation and how that motivates every single choice, rather than going in and saying, I'm going to go in and no matter what this text is, I'm going to find repetition or interesting word choice. We've been working hard to put that on the back burner and to say, that's not what we go in looking for. We go in looking for what makes this rhetorical situation unique. How does that motivate this particular speaker or writer based on the purpose and what it is they want from their audience? And so our focus has been there, and that's been a great thing. But I also know that we want to have a few good kind of solid ideas for how we can open this up when we go to write them. At the end of the day, rhetorical analysis truly is a very academic task. Argument writing, not so much. We see that out in the wild all the time. Every time that we pick up something to read, we are seeing interesting arguments written down, and we see all sorts of interesting ways to do that. Whether it's a diamond structure, the problem solution, whether it's the CFC, we have all sorts of interesting ways that we can open up. But because rhetorical analysis is a very academic task, and because we often need to do that under time parameters, I want to give you one particular structure that I think is going to be useful that still comes with some flexibility. And what I mean by that is we're going to be using the upside down triangle model, but there's going to be a little bit of flexibility because how you open up that triangle, those first 2-3 sentences, I want to show you two different ways that you could do that. So even though there are going to be two different ways and there's some flexibility there, it's still all going to fall under kind of this upside down triangle model that we're going to be taking a look at. I promise to explain that in just a moment. To do that, we're actually going to take a look at the introduction that was in the sample essay from on Garrison's editorial. I want us to take a look at the sample rhetorical analysis and how this writer opened up their paper. Now, I think it's a really good introduction considering at the end of the day, it was a timed writing and the writer probably spent 5, maybe 10 minutes, on this introduction. Probably not, though, because they wanted to get to the body paragraphs. What I really like about this, though, is I think it demonstrates that this person was a good, careful reader of the text, and therefore understood the task. And so even though I don't think it's flawless, and even though I think that, if we were taking extra time to write one of these, we might do something a little bit more, I think there are a lot of really good moments here. Let's read it top to bottom, and then we're going to talk about how this writer used the upside down triangle model to go ahead and get us there. Let's hear it one more time, though. It is only those with privilege who can encourage others to be patient. In truth, moderation is a death sentence for those without the power to enact change for themselves. And yet, this truth is difficult for many of us to hear. It is within this context that abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison crafted his first issue of The Liberator. Although many of his Northern contemporaries sympathized with Garrison's general views on slavery, he recognized the danger in their call for moderation. Therefore, Garrison utilizes his first edition of his paper to call upon his contemporaries to embrace American ideals for all people and to demand emancipation for slaves. Okay, a lot of really good things here. Again, maybe a few things that we would polish up, but at the end of the day, really, really great starting place, especially based on where the essay goes. How in the world did the writer come up with this when under such time constraints? Well, you'll notice a couple things here. We're going to talk about how the writer opens, but I also want to talk about this middle section. Notice, we don't hear about William Lloyd Garrison or the Liberator or the audience until the fourth sentence. So we're going to start by thinking about the opening. Then we're going to talk about where it is that the writer establishes this particular rhetorical situation, and then we'll talk a little bit about that thesis statement. Here's where the upside down triangle model comes into play. You'll notice as we prepare to look back at this that the writer did not open with Garrison. The writer did not open with this text at all. The writer opened up with a core concept that could be embedded in the speaker's purpose, a core concept that probably spurred this writer to sit down in the first place and craft this. What was it that was kind of eating at the writer where they said, it's this thing that I need my audience to understand? Opening up there. Then we'll start to narrow and say, okay, at the end of the day, here's this core concept, but this is a rhetorical analysis. This is a text that I looked at. Let me introduce that. Let me establish who the speaker is, the occasion, the audience, the purpose, this rhetorical situation, what made it unique, and then boom, literally and symbolically, what's the point of this rhetorical analysis going to be? It's going to be to craft a defensible thesis that analyzes the writer's rhetorical choices. Remember, analyzing doesn't mean we establish what those choices are. It's that we establish what they are, and more importantly, why. We get to focus on the impact and why it is that that speaker made that choice for that audience with this rhetorical situation. So now let's go back. I want us to keep our eye on this core concept idea. If we're not going to open up with Garrison right away, what do we open up with? If we take a look back here, notice these first three sentences. Does not mention Garrison. But what it does do is it thinks about what motivated Garrison more than anything else. It was that fear or that frustration about moderation. It's why when we had class, it was the first moment you talked about was the house on fire analogy that he has. And how can we ask someone whose house is on fire to be patient? How can we ask a mother to be patient about saving their child? It's the moderation thing that was eating at him. That's what this writer decided to open up with. Not Garrison, but what motivated Garrison? Moderation. That's that key word. So what our writer did is they took moderation and pulled that up to the top and said, I'm not going to open with Garrison. I'm going to open with moderation. This is that core idea. And so as we take a look then, it's taking a concept like moderation, which could have been in the thesis statement, but really more than anything is just the core idea of the text itself, and saying, I'm opening up with this. I'm opening up with moderation. 2-3 sentences. Beyond that, we need to get to it when it's a timed writing, right? But I think 2-3 sentences, we see that here is a great way to open it up. Core concept. We didn't talk in this moment at all about Garrison. We talked about moderation. So we're going to go ahead and turn that green. Okay, so now we've opened up our rhetorical analysis with commentary on moderation. Like, it's only those with privilege who get to say, hey, be patient. We talked in class about Dr. King and him saying the greatest threat to the Negro movement was not white supremacists, but white moderates who said, be patient. We have a core idea here. I love that the writer opened up with it. And even that inclusive pronoun of, and yet this truth is difficult for many of us to hear. But at the end of the day, we are analyzing a particular text. We're analyzing a particular speech or letter, or in this case, editorial. So this is where we've started broad, but now we've got to start to narrow. Here comes our blue section. This is where we go ahead and we start to narrow and we establish this rhetorical situation. And notice all that happens here. We establish our speaker, William Lloyd Garrison, abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison. We include that because it matters for this particular speech, right? We even have a little bit of occasion. Like, this is the first issue of The Liberator. I also think the occasion certainly could be what kind of follows here about this call for moderation. That's what spurs him to write it. I think you can kind of roll that in the first issue together a little bit. We have his audience, Northern contemporaries. So we've got speaker, occasion, audience, absolutely. And really the purpose here. calling attention to the dangers of moderation. So we've started broad, didn't talk about Garrison, talked about a core idea. Now we've narrowed in, we've established this particular speaker, this particular audience, this particular occasion, this particular purpose, this unique situation. Last but not least, we have our claim. Now, in truth, I think that this writer could have maybe done a little bit more with the thesis statement here. We know that the College Board wants us to establish what the strategies are, as well as their impact more than anything else. I think that this is a good thesis, especially considering the time parameters. At the end of the day, we reestablish that's a first edition. We establish what it is that he wants to accomplish. He wants his contemporaries, he wants his audience. What does he want from his audience? He wants them to embrace American ideals for all people. He wants them to demand emancipation for slaves. I think we could highlight some specific moments if we wanted to. I don't think it's necessary, but you could. I think the other thing that we could certainly do here is really re-emphasize the urgency, right? Now, it coming out of that blue section and talking about moderation, I think that there's certainly an element of there, but we could maybe push that a little bit more. But at the end of the day, this is that upside down triangle model. 2-3 sentences to open with that core idea that spurred this on in the first place. Using that blue section to establish our SOAP categories, because SOAP categories are just our rhetorical situation. And then, of course, our thesis statement to drive home what, but more importantly, why Garrison wrote this for this particular audience. You could establish the P in SOAPs, that purpose. You could establish that in the blue section or the red section. I think either one works. Okay. So purpose is in the thesis in this case. But again, I think if it appears anywhere in the introduction, I think you're in good shape. So once again, this was our big picture concept we went with. But there is another way to do this. Still starting broad, still not talking about the text yet, then narrowing in, and then getting to that defensible thesis all about the rhetorical choices. So what happens if we don't identify that core idea right away, or we're just kind of struggling with it? We've worked really hard on developing our argument style questions in our notebook, right? We've been asking, to what extent? What's the value in? What's the relationship between X and Y? Why not open that way? We're already doing that type of work. What if when you got to the end of Garrison's piece, you said, okay, if this was an article I just came across or that Mr. Pruder sent out, what might my AP Lang style argument question be? What if we opened there? And so we could tweak our introduction just a little bit. And instead of opening with a broad concept, we could open up with that broad question, but not broad and unrelated, broad and very much connected. Here's what it might look like, okay? We could ask, to what extent can patience actually be an impediment to progress? It's a good question, right? Because now we get to talk about we, us, our experience again. So to what extent can patience actually be an impediment to progress? We're often told to be patient. However, there are unique times in which that patience comes with severe negative implications. While there are times to slow down, there are others that demand action. Okay, again, when I rewrote this, I didn't mention William Lloyd Garrison. I didn't mention the Liberator. I didn't mention any of that. I just had that driving question. But then in our blue section, we do exactly what we've done. I tweaked it a little bit just to have it kind of start to narrow in. But at the end of the day, I'm once again establishing Garrison. I'm establishing his audience, Northern contemporaries. I'm establishing the occasion with the Liberators and also just kind of the fear about moderation. And again, I drive home purpose, what it is that he wants to accomplish. At the end of the day, he wants his contemporaries to embrace American ideals for all people and to demand emancipation for slaves. It's what he wants to accomplish. It's what he wants from them. So both of these use the upside down triangle model, right? But one of them opened up with the core idea. One of them opened up with a core question. Either one works, whichever one kind of naturally works as you look at a particular text. But this is what we're going to play with today. And to write a good introduction requires us to have been really good readers. Not just good writers, but we've been good readers. If we are good readers, if we understand the purpose of this particular text, then we can write a great introduction and we can write great body paragraphs, and then we'll talk conclusion too. All right, so here's your task today. One, I want you to go back and I want you to pick one of the texts that you looked at while I was out on paternity leave, whichever one you liked the best, whether it was President Clinton's memorial speech after the Oklahoma City bombing, whether it was Elizabeth Barrett Browning's letter to Napoleon to try and get Victor Hugo pardoned, whether it was Frida Kahlo's letter to President Valdez and saying, listen, I understand you're president, but I'm here if not here. The tone of each of these is so different. I want you to go back to whichever one you enjoyed the most. I want you to also to identify the SOAP categories, as we know these need to appear in our introduction. If you didn't write those down, or if you don't quite remember, go back and make sure you've solidified that. Then I'm going to ask you to do both kind of openings, at least the rough drafting of it. Meaning, one, what's a core concept you could open up with if you look at President Clinton's memorial speech? What's a core concept that spurred Elizabeth Barrett Browning's letter? What's a core concept that spurred Frida Kahlo's letter? What would you do for that core concept? Similarly, what's a core question you could ask? You don't need to do all three. Choose one of these that fits. To what extent? What's the value and what's the relationship between X and Y? Come up with those. And then, once you've established a core concept and you've established a core question, decide which one you think is the strongest, and off you go. Let's craft that full introduction, opening up with that core concept or core question, narrowing in by establishing this rhetorical situation, and then let's hear that thesis statement that once again establishes the writer's choices, and more importantly than anything else, establishes why the writer, why the speaker made those particular choices. All right, folks, best of luck. So excited to see what you come up with. Thanks for your hard work.